The galaxy had never seen anything like the HFY. Their invasion was swift and brutal. No species had ever withstood their onslaught. The HFY fleet, massive and relentless, obliterated everything in its path. Their weapons were devastating, capable of erasing entire planets with a single strike. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations, each with fleets of unimaginable power, had prepared for a threat like this for eons. They were the ones that controlled vast swathes of space, the ones who would set the standards of technology and warfare across the galaxy. But when the HFY arrived, it became clear that none of their power, none of their experience mattered. Every species, from the elegant Velcii to the ancient Oryx, saw the same horrifying truth. They couldn't win. The HFY didn't just conquer, they annihilated. They reduced entire civilizations to dust, their fleets retreating before the might of the invaders as they fled to distant, uncharted systems. The galaxy's greatest minds, all renowned for their wisdom, were helpless. After all, how could a species that had never faced true defeat in eons understand the terror of facing a force that simply didn't lose? Even the Oryx, whose intellect spanned thousands of years, declared there was no hope. Yet, amid this universal retreat, Earth stood still. The humans stood firm. A species that had only recently stepped onto the galactic stage, not yet a whisper among the stars, now found themselves facing an enemy that had crushed entire worlds. But there was something in humans that made them different. They hadn't forgotten what it meant to fight. While other species locked themselves behind impenetrable walls of fear, humans didn't run. Their leaders didn't hide in the shadows. They stood up. Humanity didn't have the ships, the resources, or the ancient wisdom of the other species. They were a young civilization, relatively untested on a galactic scale. But what they had was something that none of the others did: an unyielding will to survive and the courage to stand in the face of annihilation. They refused to cower, refused to believe that retreat was the only option. The first strike against the HFY came from Earth's fleet, a fleet that, by all standards, should have been obliterated within minutes of encountering the invaders. The HFY underestimated humanity, believing that their advanced weaponry and overwhelming numbers would crush the human forces without a second thought. And they almost did. But humans didn't fight fair. They didn't follow the rules of conventional warfare. Every battle was a gamble, every maneuver a question. They fought with ferocity that was born from desperation, not strength. At first, the HFY laughed. They thought humans were nothing but a nuisance. But it didn't take long for that laughter to fade. For the first time in their conquest, the HFY were unsure. They were not used to facing a species that refused to break under pressure. A species that wouldn't accept defeat as inevitable. The first battle wasn't won by sheer firepower. It wasn't won by sophisticated tactics or advanced technology. It was won by the sheer audacity of humans to take risks others wouldn't dare. They used old, outdated weaponry in ways no one could predict. They used their small, nimble ships to strike at critical points in the HFY fleet, exploiting weaknesses that the invaders had overlooked. Humanity's first victory wasn't a testament to their military strength. It was a testament to their resilience. It was a statement to the galaxy and the HFY that humanity would not be defeated without a fight. The galaxy watched as the news of the humans' first victory spread. It was a flicker of hope, a spark in the darkness. And for the first time since the HFY arrived, a question arose in the minds of the galaxy's other species. Could humanity actually stand against the invaders? Could they be the catalyst for the resistance the galaxy desperately needed? Only time would tell. But for the first time, humanity's name echoed with power across the stars. The humans' first victory sent ripples throughout the galaxy. To the HFY, it was an inconvenient delay. They viewed it as a minor setback, a nuisance that would soon be eradicated. But to the other species, it was something much more significant. It was proof that the HFY could be fought. For centuries, the galaxy's oldest and most powerful civilizations had held the belief that no force, no matter how mighty, could stand against the HFY. The humans had shattered that perception in a single, brutal engagement. The aftermath of that victory changed the dynamic of the war. The HFY, still confident in their superiority, began to tighten their grip, thinking the human success was nothing more than a fluke. They believed the other species would remain as helpless as they had been. But what the Horatii failed to realize was that humanity's victory wasn't about technology or firepower. It was about something far more dangerous: resolve. As the news of the humans' unexpected success spread, the galaxy began to stir. Species that long lived in fear of the Horatii began to reconsider their passive stance. In every corner of the galaxy, leaders who had once given up hope began to look at humanity not as a weakling to be crushed, but as a beacon of defiance. It wasn't just that humans had won. They had done so without the vast fleets or ancient knowledge that other species relied on. They had fought with a tenacity that was infectious. The question now wasn't whether the Horatii could be stopped. It was whether other civilizations had the courage to fight. The first response came from the Vel'Zai, a species known for their intellect and advanced technology. They had watched the Horatii destroy planet after planet, and had long considered themselves too valuable to sacrifice. But the Vel'Zai were pragmatic. They calculated the odds and saw that humanity had something they didn't: an unwillingness to surrender. For the first time, they began to discuss the possibility of joining the fight. Across the stars, the once divided species began to communicate. They spoke in hushed tones, unsure what would come next. Some, like the Idrak, with their ancient, battle-hardened warriors, began to prepare for battle. Others, like the peaceful Zorlani, hesitated, unsure if they had the strength to fight. Yet, one by one, species that had once given up hope began to rally behind humanity. They sent envoys, delegations, and diplomats, asking questions, seeking guidance, and offering assistance. Humanity's resolve had become a symbol of strength, and others sought to be part of it. Meanwhile, the humans didn't rest on their laurels. They knew that their victory had only bought them time, not salvation. They knew the Horatii wouldn't go down without a fight, and they wouldn't make the mistake of underestimating their enemy again. Humanity used the time to gather allies, share knowledge, and bolster their forces. Humans were quick to adapt and learn from the other species, and their capacity to think outside the box gave them an edge in developing new tactics and technologies. What they lacked in raw firepower, they made up for in ingenuity. But it wasn't just technology that made humanity a force to be reckoned with, it was their spirit. While the other species hesitated, unsure of their next steps, humanity forged ahead. They pushed their technology to its limits, but they never forgot the core of their strength: their refusal to accept defeat. Humans fought not just for survival, but for a future where they and their allies could stand free of the Horatii's shadow. The Horatii, still convinced they were unbeatable, launched a retaliatory strike with even greater force. They sent wave after wave of ships, determined to crush humanity's resistance before it gained any real traction. Yet as the battle raged, it became clear that the humans were not alone anymore. The Vel'Zai, the Idrak, the Zorlani, and countless other species joined the fray. Together, they formed a resistance force that had only one goal: to stop the Horatii from conquering the galaxy. The tide of war was beginning to shift, but it was still uncertain. The galaxy's greatest civilizations, once too afraid to act, were finally finding the courage to rise up, inspired by humanity's bravery. And the Horatii, for the first time, were beginning to realize that they were facing something they hadn't expected: a force that refused to yield, no matter the odds. The unity that emerged after humanity's first victory was nothing short of extraordinary. The galaxy, which had been fractured by fear and division, began to forge new alliances, and humans found themselves at the heart of this resistance. The other species, once paralyzed by the overwhelming strength of the Horatii, now saw humanity as a symbol of resilience. If humans could fight, so could they. And more importantly, if humanity could inspire them to fight, they could stand together and push the invaders back. Humanity's role as a unifier was no accident. Throughout their history, humans had shown an uncanny ability to form bonds and lead others, even in the most dire of circumstances. The human spirit, a mix of courage, determination, and adaptability, was contagious. Species that had spent centuries living in isolation, distrustful of one another, found themselves working side by side with humans. Earth's leaders, military strategists, and diplomats worked tirelessly to forge a new galaxy-wide alliance, a coalition that transcended old rivalries. This was no longer a fight for survival. This was a fight for the future of all life in the galaxy. The formation of the alliance was not without its challenges. Many species had their own agendas, and not all of them trusted one another. The Idrak, proud and ancient warriors, were initially reluctant to align with species they saw as inferior. The Zorlani, peaceful by nature, were hesitant to engage in war at all. But the humans, with their history of diplomacy and negotiation, managed to unite these disparate groups. Through tireless efforts, they brokered peace among their allies, convincing even the most hesitant to join the fight. The promise of a galaxy free from the Horashiai's tyranny became a powerful motivator, and slowly, the coalition solidified. The newly formed alliance began to share resources, intelligence, and strategies. Humanity, with its fierce determination and willingness to fight at any cost, became the backbone of the resistance. Their ships, though smaller and less advanced than some of their allies, were nimble and resourceful, capable of hitting hard and fast. The other species began to contribute their own strengths, whether in the form of advanced weaponry, specialized tactics, or the experience of centuries of warfare. Together, they formed a fighting force that the Horashii had not anticipated, a force that was not bound by old expectations or limitations. The Horashii, on the other hand, were beginning to feel the pressure. Their initial confidence had been shattered, not by the might of their enemies, but by their enemies' unity and unyielding resolve. The Horashii were used to overwhelming their foes through sheer force, but humanity and its allies weren't following the script. The coalition wasn't just fighting back, they were fighting smarter. They exploited weaknesses in the Horashii strategies, striking where they were least prepared. Guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and unpredictable maneuvers forced the Horashii to fight on humanity's terms, not their own. At the same time, humans began to develop new technologies. They didn't have the centuries of research that other species had, but what they lacked in time, they made up for in creativity. Humans rapidly adapted alien technology, blending it with their own innovations to create new weapons, new ships, and new ways of fighting. Their ingenuity allowed them to make up for their relative lack of advanced infrastructure. As their technology advanced, so did their capabilities in battle. Every victory, no matter how small, built the confidence of the Alliance, and with each victory, the Horashii were pushed further back. The leadership of humanity, both military and political, played a crucial role in holding the Alliance together. Their clear vision and determination kept the coalition focused on the ultimate goal, the destruction of the Horashii's war machine. It was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight to reclaim the galaxy. And the galaxy, once so divided, began to recognize the true power of humanity's resolve. They were no longer the underdogs. They were leaders. In every corner of the galaxy, the resistance was growing. The once dominant Horashii were now fighting for their survival. Their tactics, which had once been flawless, began to fail. They could no longer rely on brute force alone. As the Alliance tightened its grip on the Horashii's territory, their retreat became inevitable. The balance of power was shifting, and humanity's role in that shift was undeniable. The Horashii had underestimated humanity's ability to unite, to inspire, and to fight back. Now, they were learning the hard way that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology. It was its will to never give up, no matter the cost. The final battles were nothing short of legendary. Humanity, alongside its allies, had taken the fight to the Horashii's heart, their homeworld. It was a brutal confrontation, a culmination of years of resistance, strategy, and sacrifice. The galaxy had been turned upside down, but now, the endgame was finally in sight. The Horashii, who had once been an unstoppable force, were now fighting not just to conquer, but to survive. And humanity, once the weakest link in the chain, was now leading the charge. The Horashii fleet, once so vast and terrifying, had been whittled down over the years. Every engagement had taken a toll. Their ships, once invincible, were now showing signs of strain. They had underestimated the ingenuity of humanity and its allies, and they had failed to adapt to the unorthodox tactics employed against them. For the first time since the invasion began, the Horashii fleet was on the defensive, but the battle for the Horashii homeworld was different. This was their last stand, and they would fight with everything they had left. The planet was heavily fortified, surrounded by a fleet of warships that had been gathering for a final, desperate offensive. The Resistance knew this would be the most difficult battle of all. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. But humanity had come too far to back down now. Led by human commanders, the Alliance launched its final assault. The humans didn't rely on sheer firepower. They relied on tactics, teamwork, and the very spirit that had gotten them this far. They knew the HFY's weakness, their arrogance. They had assumed that no one could withstand their power, that no one could think beyond the predictable. But humanity, with its never-say-die attitude, had proven them wrong. And now, in the heat of the final battle, humanity used that same spirit to outmaneuver the HFY at every turn. The first wave of attacks hit with precision. Human ships, agile and unpredictable, dove in and out of the HFY's defenses, striking at key targets with surgical accuracy. It wasn't just about destroying their ships, it was about dismantling the HFY war machine piece by piece. As the first waves of HFY ships fell, the Resistance pressed on. Every explosion, every victory, sent a message to the HFY. The galaxy would no longer bend to their will. The ground battle was equally fierce. The humans had developed specialized forces that worked in tandem with their allies, combining alien technologies with human ingenuity to breach the HFY's defenses. The HFY had expected their superior forces to crush the Resistance before it could ever reach their planet's surface. But they were wrong. Humans fought with an intensity that had never been seen before. They didn't fight for power or domination. They fought for survival. They fought for the future of the galaxy. And that made them unstoppable. As the battle raged on, the HFY realized that they were losing. They had thrown everything they had at humanity and its allies, but it wasn't enough. The unity of the coalition, forged through years of hardship, was too strong. The HFY, for all their power, couldn't match the sheer force of what humanity brought to the table. Their fleets faltered, their ground forces crumbled, and their once mighty empire began to fall apart. The final blow came when the human forces, with their allies in tow, launched a coordinated strike at the heart of the HFY's command center. It was a bold move, one that required every last ounce of strength and sacrifice. But it worked. The HFY's leadership was decimated in a single, decisive blow, and with their commanders gone, their forces collapsed. The HFY, once a galaxy-spanning empire, were defeated. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a triumph of spirit, of unity, and of the will to fight against all odds. The galaxy, once on the brink of destruction, now stood free. And at the heart of that victory stood humanity. The species that had been laughed at, underestimated, and pushed to the brink of annihilation had emerged victorious. Not through overwhelming firepower or ancient wisdom, but through a simple, unshakable belief that no matter the odds, they would never give up. The galaxy would never forget that lesson. Humanity had shown them that the true power of a species was not in its technology or its history, but in its resolve. The galaxy, now united in the aftermath of the HFY's fall, had learned one indisputable truth. When every other species fled, humanity stood and fought. And in the end, that made all the difference.